Great, thank you. So we now have a panel. Join me on the stage if you are involved. And we'd like to make this interactive, so please join us, express your view, not just a question, because this, when Ben was getting feedback on the conference, many of you said in your feedback that the future of diesel is something that you're concerned about or interested in. So we want to be in a position where we can have a good debate about that. So I'd like to introduce the panel. First of all, immediately on my right is Leonard Lindholm from Volvo Group, joining us many times before, and we've been very glad to have him. Leonard has a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering, has worked 29 years at Volvo Cars and then Volvo Heavy Duty. He's worked for 17 years on OBD and represents Volvo Global Trucks Technology on OBD issues. He's spoken at our events on OBD in the past. And he is project manager for a large portion of the OBD development work associated with the next OBD steps in Europe, US, and Japan. Then next to Leonard, we have Alan Tully, who is Group Director for Engines at JCB. So glad to have a non-road perspective on the topic. So welcome, Alan. Alan received a master's degree at the University of Oxford in '78 and a fellow of the Institute of Mechanical Engineers. He began his career with Perkins before he moved to Ford, then New Holland, and the European Engine Alliance for 10 years from 1986 to 98. And he's recently moved to JCB. He's currently Group Director of Engines and responsible for engine product development. So deeply concerned about the future of diesel, I guess, and thinking about what's best for JCB in the future. And then finally, we're very glad that Cecile's joined us from Association of Emissions Control by Catalyst, which is a group in Brussels which represents companies that are involved in controlling emissions with catalyst technology. And she is the EU Technical Affairs Manager of the Association of Emissions Control by Catalyst. She joined in 2007, and before then she worked in passenger car emission control in industry. She's been involved in projects with different manufacturers, including OEMs and tier suppliers, and was also an SCR product engineer with Energy. So welcome, Cecile. So before we open to the floor, I've given you my view at length, so I'd like to hear from the panel, I guess from your perspective, which would be heavy duty for Leonard and non-road for Alan, and then Cecile, I guess across the board. Do you see, or how do you see the long-term prospects for diesel powertrains, and where do you see us seeing switches soonest, I guess? Can we start with Leonard?
Taking in consideration the success story of the nitrogen oxides emission on the heavy-duty Euro 6, actually, if you have read the pocketbook from ICCT, you will notice that the Euro 6 truck pollutes have less nitrogen oxides than a diesel passenger car per kilometer. And if you also look in the same pocket guide, you will see that the nitrogen oxides of a heavy-duty truck is 4 times higher than a traditional gasoline car with a 3-way catalyst, but that per kilometers. But then again, a truck consumes more than 4 times of a truck. So in terms of per liter of fuel, an average Euro 6 truck can even compete with a 3-way catalyst gasoline car. So I don't see the, and the particulate matters, that is history with a particulate filter. So I don't see from an emission perspective that there should be anything that would stop the diesel. Then on the second question, where we will see alternative and hybridization, you will see mainly hybridization on the bus sides, and that has already happened. And there are also demonstrators with full electrical bus and plug-in versions. And you will also see some electrification on the distribution sides, like on garbage truck and short-range distribution. It will move from short duty cycles and upwards, that is how you will see the shift. And in parallel to that one, you will also see alternative fuels, and it will mainly be methane-based. Then whether those are renewable or not, that is dependent on the country. If you take Sweden, which is my home city, if you go to a gas station and fill up your CNG, then on average 50% is biofuel and 50% is from the bottom of the ground.
Thanks, Leonard. So just to conclude, do you see any change in powertrains for heavy trucks, for long haul trucks in the next 10 years?
In the next time, for sure, we will see some sort of mild hybridization. And also you will see the LNG on the long haul application. And on the shorter range, then you will see the CNG, and that is already the case today. And there are LNG long haul application out there.
Thank you. Alan, how do you see this? How do you see the mix of powertrain in your products?
Can you hear me? Yeah. Thanks. So I think it's good to remember that construction equipment and off-highway generally has a vast range of applications, going from very small pieces of equipment with a few horsepower up to very large pieces with many hundreds of horsepower. So that sets the need for a whole range of powertrain solutions. I think when we look at the current concerns about air quality and the sort of blame that's been placed on diesel engines, a lot of it is unwarranted and irrational, etc., which needs addressing. But fundamentally, it's an urban issue of air quality. Therefore, really, the solutions need to be urban. As far as construction equipment or NRMM is concerned, there are some low emission zones coming in place. There's one in London, there are other cities as well. And they generally mean you have to use the latest technology or move towards that. That's sensible because, as has been discussed, the issue with diesel originated air quality is with old diesels, and I think there's lots of evidence that the latest technology gives clean diesel. Although it's not zero emissions, it's very close to zero for practical purposes. And when you look at some of the origins of oxides of nitrogen in cities, only a portion of it comes from diesel engines. If you make that zero, there's still significant nitrogen oxide air quality issues in cities, which are politically more difficult to address. So if you look at it in the UK, a lot of it comes from domestic heating. It wouldn't be politically very popular to ask people to fit SCR systems to their gas boilers. Though the catalyst industry might like it. So I think from a construction equipment point of view, there'll be various solutions. You can imagine small equipment to be used in the urban environment might well be battery electric. Large equipment, can't really see in the medium term any alternative to diesel, but obviously for urban use of those large machines, and the urban use tends to be less because don't tend to use large machines in the middle of cities. It'll be the latest diesel will be incentivized, and I've never seen the case for fuel cells, hydrogen fuel cells, and I guess the reason I don't see the case for it is hydrogen doesn't exist naturally, so you have to make it. If you're making hydrogen, you might as well make methane or diesel fuel, and there's already the infrastructure there to distribute that, and there's already all the industry there to create engines which can use the fuel cleanly. So why bother?
Thanks, Alan. What do you think about the introduction of some hybridization on the heavier equipment? Do you have plans for that, or do you see that happening?
So hybridization. So I mean, hybridization has a small effect on air quality. Main driver of hybridization would be fuel economy, CO2. As with any application, it's very duty cycle dependent, and there are some pieces of construction equipment which have duty cycles which make hybridization attractive or warranted. As I think you mentioned, there's a bit less pressure on off-highway equipment on fuel consumption than there is on trucks. You know, trucks is what you live day in, day out, I'm sure, in terms of those running costs. So it's not quite so critical as heavy truck on fuel consumption, though many people do use heavy equipment in a very efficient and effective way, and they'll monitor it. So in many countries the fuel is not taxed, so the fuel cost is lower. So the cost balance for a hybrid system is a bit different to when you're using taxed diesel. So there will be some, I think, but it's probably not a massive move towards hybridization.
And just building on that, I guess there's also no discussion about, or no immediate discussion about CO2 regulation for off-highway equipment, which means you don't have that same pressure that's coming for trucks.
No, I think it's been talked about a lot, but it's because the duty cycles, because the usage of the machines is so varied, it's quite difficult to come up with a standardised cycle. I would say not impossible. If you look at the certification cycle, which we use, the NRTC, I mean that was generated by the EPA, who commissioned Southwest Research to go out and look a variety of machines and construct this cycle. So you could look at CO2 number based on that cycle, for example. So it's not impossible, but real world measurement and comparison of CO2 for equipment is quite difficult.
Very difficult. Thank you. Cecile, how do you see this? When you're looking at the future, where do you see diesel featuring in these different applications?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I think the situation is strongly linked to the political pressure that is on local authorities right now. You have these air quality issues, the NO2 infringements in several areas, and the European Commission's putting or threatening the member states to take them to court. So local authorities have to come up with plans to deliver improvement on air quality issues, and there is a lot of emotions that have been added on top with everything that has happened in the last 18 months, I would say, with the Dieselgate, and there is not always facts behind political decisions or ideas on, for example, on access restriction to cities for cars in particular. There is a clear distinction that I think has been mentioned by the other panelists on the old diesel and the new diesel. It is clear that pollutant emissions of old diesels were much higher than they are now. The introduction of diesel particulate filter has basically put the ultrafine particles emission almost to zero level. The introduction of DeNOx after treatment, such as SCR technology, is also providing very efficient control of NOx emissions. The legislative development also has helped. We've seen in the most recent stages of European legislation the introduction of in-use emission measurements, which really help to not only look at emissions in the lab, but really what do they deliver in reality. So Euro 6 for heavy duty is very, I think is a success story. Many institutes like TNO, for example, have published in-use emission data of Euro 6 vehicles that show that they are really clean. There had been some maybe less effective emission control detected during some urban operation, and as a result the legislation has been tightened, And from next year onwards, then there will be a stronger focus on this low load operation and a stronger emission control requirement. I think the stage 5 for non-road will also be a very a game changer in the fact that also we see that DPF will be introduced. So even though I think the non-road sector is not a major contributor to emissions inventory, but when these construction machinery, for example, are used in big city centers, then there is a local impact on the population, not only the workers in the area, but also the people living around. So the fact that this legislation has addressed the issue is a positive. And then I think the third element is on passenger cars, and we see that clean diesel cars are coming to the market. I mean, I was 2 years ago in this conference. I mean, it was in Brussels, but I presented the real driving emission results from a clean diesel already, and we see that there are more and more models that are put to the market. The real driving emissions legislation will come into force in September for new types, and then in 2 years from now will be a requirement for all new vehicles, and we'll really make sure that that cars are clean when they are operated on the road. We also see that from the European Parliament, where there have been an inquiry committee on what failed in the system, why did Dieselgate happen? This committee in the Parliament has issued a list of recommendations, and this includes a request to the European Commission to consider whether a Euro 7 standard would be suitable. There are still differences between diesel and gasoline in the Euro 6 standard. Sometimes it's more stringent for diesel, sometimes it's more stringent for gasoline. What I mean is that, for example, gasoline cars are not regulated in terms of particulate number, at least for the PFI. And on the opposite, the diesel NOx limit is slightly higher than the gasoline. So there is room for harmonization and more fuel-neutral standards, and that should be at least considered whether there could be some further improvement. That's at least the request from the legislators. I think another aspect of diesel is, I think it was mentioned, the renewal of the fleet, and the fact that the old vehicle are still the main contributor. At least for the heavy duty and the non-road sector, there are some, I'm not sure the panelists will agree, but there are some options to retrofit after treatment system, and this has been tackled by the UNECE forum, and they have come up with a regulation 132 on retrofit components that are setting standards, performance-based standards for retrofit. And local authorities can always refer to that standard if they want to restrict, like maybe for a low emission zone, either a Euro 6 or stage 5 or retrofitted older equipment according to that standard. So there are options to also clean up the legacy fleet, let's say.
Thank you, Cecile. So let's open to the floor. We'd welcome your view on this point or a question for the panel, and help us to understand where this is heading. I think there's so many open questions that need to be tackled. So raise your hand if you have a question. Any thoughts on where this is going? I'll ask the panel then a question raised by Cecile, to both of you in terms of your perspective on retrofits. It's a big section of emissions inventory, of course, and Cecile mentioned the air quality. Air quality is where the concern is stemming from originally. It's the most authentic basis, I think, to make a decision. So do you see increasing demand for retrofits of your machine or your vehicles?
I suppose what I'd say about retrofit is that it's very easy to say we can solve this problem just by getting rid of old machines and old engines. So we can just say scrap everything before Euro 6. But of course that's not practical. People own these machines and they want to continue to use them. So you can improve the emissions of older vehicles and machines by retrofitting. I think what some of the data shows, I don't know if it's been presented in here, I presented some in the NRMM on Euro 6 buses. If you take a Euro 3 level bus, shall we say, do a very good retrofit on it with DPF and SCR, you can probably, dramatically cut the particulates with DPF, but you can probably reduce the NOx output by a factor of 3, maybe 4. That sort of level, and that in itself is a good improvement. But of course, it gets nowhere near to the new Euro 6 levels, and it'll always be a case of, is it worth retrofitting that old machine, or should I buy a new one? That's just the practicalities of it. For off-highway, we don't see a great deal of demand for that. There has been some activity of retrofitting machines to address local needs in a low emission zone, for example, in some of the cities. But generally, it's not there's not a big incentive, I think, as there has been with buses.
Is that something that you do at JCB? Do you offer a retrofit service for your equipment, or would that be aftermarket?
It's aftermarket, yes. I mean, there are some that we've looked at, shall I say. So if people are wanting to do that, we can point them in the right direction.
I see.
But we don't do it as a company.
Yeah, thank you. How about Volvo? Do you see an increasing need to retrofit, Leonard?
I don't see an increasing need. There is a slight need, and it's not really driven by Brussels or driven by lower fuel consumption. It's mainly driven by city bus cooperation, which has a sort of local political agenda to have certain emission improvement targets. And personally, I haven't seen any successful example with retrofitting with an aqueous urea systems, but there are some quite successful retrofit system based on solid urea. Basically, the Aminex systems, if I may have name. It's too complicated to do it with an aqueous urea. I don't see anyone even try doing it, and we certainly doesn't offer it. So if you want it, you have to buy it from an independent, and then it's solid urea, which is, they have the advantage that you don't need this massive heat management system that has been presented by several presenters. This like 9 or 8 different heat management systems, that software that needs to work together. You need to get rid of that complexity, and you do that by using solid urea that converts at a lower temperature.
Yeah, I think I'd just add that most of the activity we see is with DPFs. Very rarely see anything with SCR.
Yeah, I guess the interaction with the engine makes the retrofit of NOx particularly complicated.
Yeah.
Integration needed, yeah. Any questions then from the audience?
Yeah, I would have some comments to make. The main point is that diesel has always been like the ugly sister in the refining process of petrol. For years, diesel was much cheaper. In the 60s, 70s in Italy, diesel was half price compared to petrol, to gasoline. And you had to pay an extra tax if you had a diesel car. Yeah, so that's also why in Italy LPG became very popular, because it was an alternative. But in the years coming, diesel engines improved with the common rail injection. Performance of diesel engines were as good as petrol engines, and service intervals were even longer. If you drive a diesel today, you don't notice any difference between diesel and petrol. Now, in the construction or in mining or whatever, they're still very old diesels because their lifespan is much longer than petrol engines, and the maintenance is cheaper. So some kind of retrofit to make them more environment friendly is definitely a solution. And I believe also this hype about pollution and so on. This is a lot of hype by press or whatever. I'll give you an example. There was, some years ago, children would get a triple vaccination against morbillo, rubella, and so on. So newspapers came out saying, if you have your child vaccinated, you double the chance that it becomes autistic, which is true. The thing is that your chance to be autistic is 1 in 200,000 if you're not vaccinated, and it's 1 in 100,000 if you're vaccinated. So it's true, statistically double the chances. So let's look a little bit at statistics and bring a little bit of perspective in the whole thing.
Yeah. I guess the challenge is real, though. There are genuine air quality issues for well-known reasons in cities, and that's why we have strong push from regulators. We know here in Germany the KBA is pushing car manufacturers to even look at recalibrating or reconfiguring older cars to address in some way compensate for the effects of some of the Dieselgate scandal. So we can't deny there's a real challenge here which needs to be addressed, and I guess the industry is going to have to respond perhaps more robustly than it has so far, especially on the light duty side. Yeah, there's always the balance needed, absolutely. We have a question on the left side there. Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much for the introduction. So, first a comment. We have to get rid of this idea that air pollution is just an issue for the urban areas. That's not true. That's not accurate. NOx and ozone is a problem also in rural areas where they burn the crops. So it definitely is an issue. So not just air quality becomes a problem in urban areas. Then the question is, now with it's more for light duty, with the introduction of the new regulations, are we expecting a half step back because of the regime between NOx and diesel particles? I mean, are we expecting that to compile with NOx, we are going to have more frequent regenerations? It's going to be an issue in the next future? It's for the panel.
I didn't quite understand the question. Are you saying, will we see an impact on PM because of more frequent regenerations?
That's right.
Yeah.
Are we expecting that?
I would expect if you have a lean NOx absorber, then you will do a bit more frequent generation than some are doing on the light duty side today. And that will, of course, generate some particulates.
What about SCR, Leonard, which applies now for most systems?
Sorry.
Go on.
I think the NOx control is improved with improved after-treatment systems, and not so much with, if I understand the question, with increasing engine out NOx towards, or decreasing engine out NOx. So I don't think that there is so much of a direct impact on the frequency of DPF regeneration.
Yes.
I think the improvement has to come from low temperature DNOx control, mainly. That's where we still have some improvement to be done.
The main fear was coming from overuse of EGR now to increase particles because of the use of this, and reduce NOx, increase particles, and then, well, we are in a very good situation. You are all right. The diesel are doing much better. So let's go back again.
If I've interpreted the question correctly, you're concerned about more particulate emission due to more frequent regeneration. I think the way things are moving is to put much more focus on the performance of the after-treatment system, the SCR system. Therefore, the engine-out NOx numbers are going up. Generally, when the engine-out NOx numbers go up, the engine-out particulate goes down, and therefore your burden on DPF for regeneration should decrease. I'd just like to make one comment, and for my presentation yesterday I made the point that need to be careful about taking a holistic approach. We see a lot of pressure for the reduction of diesel use in cars. The car diesel's been through the process, if you like, of very much cleaning up the particulate emissions, so that with an effective filter system, you know, the particle emissions from car diesels are very, very low. We're incentivising the use of petrol, gasoline. The ultrafine particulate emissions from gasoline engines are thousands of times higher than from a diesel engine. So what we're doing by going down that route is massively increasing the ultrafine particles in our cities. So we need to be careful of some of these trends.
Some unintended consequences could arise. Absolutely.
And you know, and it's a complex thing because the particulate emissions from a gasoline engine are different from a diesel engine. The way you measure particle number is focused on diesels, not on gasoline. Therefore, you don't necessarily get the right results when you measure in that way, etc., etc., etc. But you know, that's an unintended consequence, if you like, of this high-level media or political pressure to get rid of diesels. You'll get other things coming through, and in a few years' time, people will say, "Well, why the hell did we do that?"
Absolutely. One final question, if we have one.
James Wiley, Johnson Matthey, just a comment on the retrofit of SCR systems. So there was a comment that the Aminex system's been very successful in Sweden and aqueous urea systems not. I just wanted to make it clear that aqueous urea systems can be and are successfully retrofitted.
Can you comment on the applications you've seen good success?
Well, London buses, for example.
Thank you very much. Any final comments or questions? Otherwise, we've reached the end of the session. It's time to take a break. So thank you to the panel for really insightful, interesting contributions, and thank you for listening and contributing. See you in half an hour. Thank you.